Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So I've been watching this Oliver Stone JFK Through the Looking Glass, which I believe is a re-edit of JFK Destiny Betrayed by Oliver Stone. Both are really interesting. Um, I think the Destiny Betrayed was a bit more in depth and a lot more. The only thing I wish he had done is presented maybe his version of what he believed were, recreation of the event of what he believed based on the evidence that he had uncovered, how many shooters there were, where they could have been, and all that kind of stuff. I was wondering as well whether it would be possible to make a computer simulation of this, with the technology being as great as it is, and feed in. I suppose the problem is the information you feed in may give you the answers that. Well, I don't know. I suppose that it could, if you gave it like the real world area and where the president was shot. But then I suppose it would tell you whether it's possible for one shooter to have done that. But the problem is the information that you give it depends how accurate that is. And what this showed, this documentary, both of them, was it was very messy. There's a lot of holes in this stuff, a lot of things that wasn't shown to the Warren Commission. There was a lot of evidence where we haven't seen it, and there's still evidence that Donald Trump didn't release when he had the chance to recently. So we don't know what that is. And the thing is, but what it doesn't show is the mistakes and these problems. Is it because of incompetence, which of course humans are incompetent sometimes, because maybe they're not used to dealing with the death of the president, or was it a conspiracy, which is what Oliver Stone is alluding to. For there's lots of things like the fact that the people who did the autopsy, of President Kennedy were inexperienced, and why did they pick someone who was inexperienced to do this? And then the changing of the holes, that the initial they thought the entrance was the front because it was a tracheotomy, and that's why the hole was bigger, but it wasn't. A lot of people said it was from the back. Of course, the problem is because there were different angles and there was only a certain amount of bullets. That's what's led to the belief that there was more than one shooter, the grassy knoll shooter, or the somewhere else in the building. And then there were other attempts, apparently, of 2 attempts previous to the 1963 November 23rd attempt on Kennedy's life. I didn't know about this. I don't know how far they got to them or how much evidence there is on those. It didn't really show too much whether they were involved in the assassination of Kennedy, whether Oswald was in the building. Some people say he wasn't in the building. There's evidence to show he wasn't. There was evidence that, because a policeman went into that building almost minutes after the shooting, which seems strange. How did he know to go in that building? I mean, he couldn't. If there was a shooting suddenly, you wouldn't know where the shooting came from, especially if if you're in the moment. How would you been going to the right building? And then apparently the two women coming down the building didn't see Oswald, but they saw the policeman. Of course, there are reasons that, could have been different, slightly timing. I mean, I don't know what window of a gap would you need. And there's all sorts of so, of course, a lot of people have gone on the fact that this is consequential evidence and it's not factual. But I mean, I think anyone watching this documentary, assuming what Oliver Stone has put isn't been cherry picked or confirmation bias, there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that shows there's a lot of problems, a lot of bits that don't add up, and a lot of things that weren't shown to the right people, the wrong people doing jobs. Whether Oswald was a patsy, the shooting of him by Jack Ruby, to me that always looked like theatre. And Oliver Stone was mentioning in the documentary that you hear two beeps, as almost as if like this is when you shoot him. I wonder whether Oswald, who claimed to be a patsy, whether this was all staged and he was a fake shot in a Hollywood-style shooting in front of the cameras, taken away and, lived his life somewhere else, like they say Hitler did. And Jack Ruby died in prison of some kind of medical condition. They both went to live somewhere else. Who knows? That's me adding to the conspiracy. But I suppose what we do know is the truth of the matter is that Kennedy was assassinated. Whether it was by state, whether it was by CIA, FBI, whether it was by Oswald, whether it was by a lone gunman or more, whether it was by the mafia or cartel, whoever it was, he was killed. And the question like they were asking is, why was he killed? And obviously they picked a lot of his speeches, which shows that this man was very against war, suggesting that he wasn't in control of the country. It's very illuminating to show, and it makes you think that all these presidents and prime ministers, how much control do they really have of these countries? How much is of their own will as opposed to their advisors? Because they all have advisors and generals and stuff come and tell them things or show them documents. And then who actually is in control? Is, you think the president and prime minister is, but it's these advisors and civil servants who've given this information and present this in front of them, and then they say yes or no. Kennedy is pictured as a man who didn't just say yes just for yes, just to please these military people, and that's the reason why they suggest that he may have been killed, because he didn't want to get involved in Vietnam. And that shows how Johnson, the president after him, how he was involved in things. And it's worth the watch. I can't detail all of them, but there's a lot of, I would say, problems when you watch this and think about, wow, do we really know the truth about who killed Kennedy? And I would say we probably don't know the real truth about Kennedy. And we don't even really know who killed Kennedy, because there's evidence to suggest that Oswald wasn't even in the building of where they suggest that he would have had to have been to have killed him. The shots coming from different directions, bullets going, the magic bullet going through different directions, and changing of pathology reports with the holes being moved around, people being interviewed and not using them in the commission's report. So there was a lot of, I would say that I wouldn't be certain based on what I saw there, that I, A, don't know who killed the president, and B, I don't know why he was killed, what the motives were. But of course, after he was removed, Vietnam happened, and he was making friends with Cuba and Russia and things like this, which of course for the system that could be a big problem. Maybe Kennedy was this person that we've always wanted in power, who actually would do the right thing rather than who, like say the Tony Blairs, who seemed like the right person, but once they met Bush or once they got involved in things, suddenly they became different. They became just like the rest. But of course, I don't know with Kennedy, maybe possibly Oliver Stone picked certain speeches that makes him look better than he was. Everyone's human, I know that, but what I saw of the speeches and what I know of the man, he was more, he was against racism. He was trying to do things to make the country integrated. He was trying to not just get involved in wars. He was trying to make peace with Russia and Cuba rather than keeping this hatred that now, it's very interesting when we see this now, when I was watching that, and then when you see this Ukraine issue with Russia and the West, it's like history repeating itself over and again, playing chess in Ukraine, but with Russian and Western soldiers, but the pieces of the Ukrainians, whether that's all about gas and, trying to secure the gas problem from both sides, or not wanting Russia to have too much influence. But yeah, it's a really good documentary. It's worth the watch because it opens your eyes to the fact that you've been told a certain thing, you've been taught something in history classes, and they're probably not updating these things. I'm sure if you ask Alexa or your teacher who killed John F. Kennedy, they're going to say Harvey Oswald. Harvey Oswald, is that right? I've forgotten his name now. But I mean, this documentary, you're led to believe after it that almost certainly the CIA were involved in it. Maybe what they really did is, like I believe in these terrorist events these days, that they knew it was going to happen and just allowed it to happen. And maybe they assisted. That's the thing. They may have had someone else who was working for them that assisted to make sure it got done, but then clear it up, because they don't want a conspiracy, because if they have more than one person, like in these days, in these terrorist events, then it becomes questions about, how did this happen? But anyway, worth the watch. I don't know if it's on YouTube. I'll put some links if I find. But yes, JFK, is it History Portrayed? I've forgotten the title now, and Through the Looking Glass. Take care, take it easy, God bless. Peace.